Hey everyone, this is Tanya. Thanks for tuning in to Black Women Read, reviews of books, zines, and everything in between. So like a lot of people, I watched Rest in Power, the Trayvon Martin story. Of course, watching the documentary series reignited the rage I felt when I first heard of this young man's death. I will never get over the fact that the 17-year-old was brutally murdered while simply trying to find his way home. I will never get over hearing Trayvon screaming for help that was captured on audio. I was literally in tears at the end of each episode. The series did an excellent job of showing the white hostility that surrounded Trayvon's murder. It's not surprising that the Black Lives Matter movement came out of this specific incident. White people felt very emboldened to espouse white supremacist rhetoric and publicly engaged in racist rants displays against black protesters. The evilness shown towards Trayvon and his family is something I will never forget. The behavior of white people at the time was the foreshadowing of the Trump years. All of the episodes were extremely well done. However, it was episode number 4 that I found to be brilliant. The episode featured Trayvon's friend, Rachel Jeantel. Rachel was on the phone with Trayvon when he was being stalked by George Zimmerman. She was later brought in as a witness for the prosecution. The episode did a great job of highlighting the disdain that this country has for black women. Rachel represented everything they dislike about black women. Black women like Rachel are often used as the antithesis of white womanhood. Rachel was dark-skinned, heavy-set, and deemed uneducated because she didn't speak proper English, quote unquote. She was openly mocked and laughed at in court. She was poorly prepared for court by the prosecution. Of course, this led to her fumbling during cross-examination because she was having to do it on her own. Also, she was only 19 years old at the time. She was relegated to the ghetto black girl trope stereotype. What Rachel experienced is a unique hatred for black women called misogynoir. Misogynoir is a term coined by queer black feminist Moya Bailey. I noticed, while doing more research on Moya, that she has been an integral part of many scholarly journals, online articles, etc. However, I was surprised she hadn't published her own book yet. I was pleased to read that she's actually coming out with a book next year called Transforming Misogynoir: Black Women's Digital Resistance in U.S. Culture. Of course, this is going on my must-read list. I found a really good interview from this year with Moya and Trudy. Trudy helped popularize the term with her womanist blog, Gradient Layer. The interview titled On Misogynoir, Citation, Erasure, and Plagiarism gives space to the work of these writers, intellectuals, with the creation of misogynoir and its usage and misuse in feminist, activist, and mainstream circles. The interview is very detailed, so I'm just going to read some parts from it that I found interesting. The first question asked of Moya is, what prompted you to come up with the word misogynoir? She responds, as a queer black woman, I was struggling to find a way to talk about the racial visual violence I was seeing in popular culture throughout history. My dissertation was a historical study that looked at the way doctors are trained around race and gender. I found that the stereotypes that circulate in popular culture still make their way into educational environments to shape the way medical students think about their future patients. Black women were disproportionately targeted in the jokes students tell themselves, and these stereotypes ended up leading to ideas about Black women that negatively impacted their care. Trudy is asked, "What made you want to start writing about misogynoir?" She says, "While I have been interested in womanism since adolescence, from an early reading of The Color Purple by Alice Walker, it wasn't until adulthood in 2012 that I started a space, Gradient Layer, specifically for my womanist writing. It also became important to me to connect how misogynoir in interpersonal relationships is impacted by misogynoir in mainstream media, which impacts misogynoir in state violence. For example, making these connections between relationships, entertainment, and institutional violence helped me not only understand my own experiences, but how Black women in particular experience inequalities and abuse." Moya's asked, "When did you notice it start to pick up steam, the word misogynoir?" She states, "I had to speak up when I noticed that some people were trying to dilute the term by making it applicable to all women of color, which is not the context in which it was developed. The experiences of people of color are so different, I wanted to get specific to talk about a particular reality that women of color, quote unquote, just can't encompass. I wrote a small note on my blog that read in part, I say all this to say that it's important to me and to at least one other non-Black person of color that the term is used to describe the unique ways in which Black women are pathologized in popular culture. What happens to Black women in public space isn't about them being any woman of color. It is particular, and it has to do with the ways that anti-Blackness and misogyny combine to malign Black women in our world." Moya is then asked, "How have you been discussed in relation to the word?" She notes, "Sometimes I am cited, and sometimes I am not. It's been Black women like Trudy who make sure my name is associated with the term when they are writing. I want to reiterate that I don't think I should be cited all the time, but I do wish people would ask me more directly what I mean by the word." Trudy is asked about her involvement with the word. She says, "For the most part, I am not discussed in relationship to the word. On several occasions, I have contacted writers to ask why my contributions to this scholarship have been erased. In casual conversations in social media spaces, I am almost never referenced, even if people do decide to mention Moya's coinage. Most people who know the word have yet to acknowledge how I am involved. While I do not expect anyone to cite my work when discussing their personal experiences with misogynoir in their lives or the lives of people they care about, when these personal experiences become public and or paid theory, explanation, or analysis of misogynoir, articles that erase my relationship to this word, then that erasure also becomes misogynoir. Despite being very visible in social media, my relationship to this word is incidentally or deliberately ignored." Trudy is then asked, "You've talked about plagiarism in your online theorizing of misogynoir. What has that looked like?" Trudy states, "My many spaces and publications, both indie and mainstream, either reduced my years of work to a single essay of mine or erased my work altogether. When I wrote that particular essay in 2014, I did so not as a journalist who learned a new word, but as someone who had been theorizing and developing a frame for how misogynoir is even defined and understood, especially outside of academia. In other words, primarily, Moya and I are why journalists, activists, and others can even write on misogynoir at all. Because of the social status ascribed to mainstream media, their words are held over mine. This hierarchy that facilitates the conditions for plagiarism and erasure that I experience around my theorizing on misogynoir ironically reflects how misogynoir functions in social and institutional settings." Both Moya and Trudy are asked, "What do you hope for the future of Black women's activism and the end of misogynoir?" Moya says, I hope that we turn our attention inward and do more work on healing the harm we cause each other. Trudy responds, even within activist spaces, people put unreasonable expectations on black women, know all, do all, and solve all. Misogynoir cannot end if misogynoir exists even within the expectations on black women in activist spaces. So yeah, I skimmed a lot of this interview because it's very detailed and both women give great answers. So I definitely recommend reading this on your own. It provides deeper insight into why the term misogynoir is so important. It forces us to examine the interconnections of racism and sexism and oppression and domination used against black women. This article highlighted why the treatment of Rachel Gentile was so troubling to me. I hope people will read this amazing interview with Moya Bailey and Trudy. I will put the link in the description box. Thank you for listening, and I will see you at the next video.